Welcome to J Life with Daniel. I'm your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. Just a little bit of background on today's podcast. I am what you might define as the quintessential liberal who is scared of guns, doesn't really know much about it, has never really seriously thought about self-defense. And as I can imagine, for a lot of Jews around the country, that started to change on October 7th in very serious ways. And we'll get to specifics in a moment. I'm very excited to welcome both Dimitri and Joseph to come talk to us all about self-defense, both for Jews and just in general throughout America, especially in the post-October 7th world. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
So we'll get to some of my perhaps liberal misgivings about guns in a couple of minutes, but just to give the listeners a little bit of background, you two founded a new organization a couple of months ago. Can you sort of go through a little bit of the background and the founding and really what your guys' mission is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, post October 7th, we sort of saw that there was a need for a Jewish defense organization of sorts. So it's probably important to talk about what we're not, which is we're not the JDL, we're not the JDO or Jewish defense organizations of the past. And I think there's a big stigma with Jewish defense organizations in this country because of those. So we really like to look at ourselves as a Jewish defense organization for the modern age. And that includes that we want to make sure that everybody feels protected. So that includes, black, white Jews, that includes liberals, it includes conservatives, it includes LGBTQ, everybody. We want everybody to feel protected and safe. And that is, kind of what distinguishes us, between or us and previous Jewish defense organizations. We're not extremists. We're not people that, preach or anything like that. We believe that Jews have the right to defend themselves and do that on a 360-degree level, which we'll sort of get into in a little bit. But so at post October 7th, I looked around and I knew that there were Jewish defense organizations that existed. When I looked around, they weren't around. And when I looked into the reasons why, is because, there was some extremism and they sort of went on the offensive to attack and things like that. So I started thinking about how we can have a Jewish defense organization in today's world that will stand the test of time. So shortly after the murder of Paul Kessler, and if you're in the LA and California area, I'm sure you'll recall that name. But if you haven't, Paul Kessler was a older gentleman that was protesting on the sidewalk, and he got pretty much murdered by a counter protester to hit him in the head with a megaphone. He fell on the ground and ended up succumbing to his injuries. When I saw that, and I hadn't been thinking about this, but I knew that the time had come and that we needed to do something because things were going to get worse. And as we've seen, they are. So in November of last year, I ended up starting this. And Dimitri sort of came on board very shortly after, found me on the Instagram page, and he was like, "Hey, I'm a lawyer, and if you ever need a lawyer, and I'm really interested in helping." And I remember my girlfriend going, "Well, what do you need a lawyer for, right?" And I go, "I don't know, but they come in handy." And this guy seems,
you always need a lawyer.
You always need a lawyer, right? So Dimitri and I sort of we met just and we really hit it off, and we've just been sort of pushing this mission forward, together. And he's been just amazing friend and ally and just the biggest help. So yeah, that's kind of the story of how we met and what we're doing.
Right. So
you had mentioned the JDL. Sorry to cut you off, Dimitri. Just for listeners that have never heard of the JDL, just mentioned it a couple of times. This was the now infamous Jewish group and mostly centered around Brooklyn, really at the second half of the 20th century, that again was actually founded with a very just cause. I mean, there was rampant anti-Semitism on the streets in Brooklyn. My father actually grew up in Brooklyn during the age where the JDL was there. So it's actually interesting talking to him and a lot of his friends that grew up in Brooklyn also during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. because a lot of them actually saw the JDL as a very necessary and also scary instrument of communal protection. A lot of murky ethics that I think surround that. Obviously, towards the later days of the JDL, they really did turn into the offensive, and then eventually they became listed as a terrorist group. And so, just for listeners that are wondering, what are these acronyms that you're referring to? Just there, go for it, Dimitri.
I was going to say that, in addition to having our web page and Instagram presence, we also have something called the Alpha Jew Podcast. That's the T-shirt. Okay, so the podcast itself basically introduces us to whoever's listening, and we also have guests, and I might add some very interesting ones.
Yeah, I love it. And we'll certainly, for listeners that want to learn everything about it, we'll talk about your Instagram page, talk about some of the future programs that you guys have coming up at the end. So let me start by almost necessarily playing devil's advocate in some sense in terms of the post-October 7th reality. This is not my personal opinion, but what I can imagine a lot of people listening to this podcast, perhaps those that haven't really thought about self-defense, maybe they've never heard of Paul Kessler, maybe they've never been to a pro or anti-Israel rally, and they look around and they say, things for Jews are quite safe. It doesn't seem like there's rampant anti-Semitism on the street. Why should I take the time to really worry about physical safety and self-defense? What's sort of the elevator pitch to sort of wake people up? We were talking a little bit before. We had some notes. One of the things that I think, Joseph, you wrote is that the golden age of safety for Jews in the USA is over. What would you sort of use as your metric to somebody that's a little bit cynical, that maybe just has not been following what's been happening, in all the protests, maybe that isn't on social media as much as probably the three of us is? What would you sort of say to wake people up out of the sort of slumber of saying, oh, listen, the last 50 years in America has been unprecedentedly safe for Jews. We're certainly in a golden age. Why should I worry about, self-defense and weapons and all of these things?
Well, first of all, I think we need to take a step back and look at the college campuses. Okay, I mean, everybody's seen that. Everybody's seen Jewish kids being excluded from going to the library, going to their classes. You can't go here, you can't go there because you're a Jew. I mean, that's just outrageous. It simply is outrageous. There were also attacks on campuses, physical attacks on Jewish students, right? Um, Very recently, I think a few days ago, right, Joseph, there was a post by the head rabbi of, I think, France or Paris, maybe the city itself, or maybe the entire country. And he said that the country of France is no longer safe for Jews. Okay. I mean, it's happening all over Europe, Australia, Canada, and in the United States. We're a little bit behind, I would say, Europe, thankfully, but we're going in the same general direction. If you look at a lot of these social media posts, you see a lot of videos of Jews being attacked on the streets. There's rampant hatred of Jews. People standing there with Israeli flags on a street corner. A car goes by, somebody yells at them, curses at them, you dirty Jew, you this, you that, and some of these incidents turn into physical attacks. And that's how it starts.
Yeah, and I guess what I'd like to add to that is you got to look at history. I'm a big fan of history, and if you look at Jewish history and the way things have worked out for Jews in the past, we've always been attacked. We've always had this sort of, every generation, we've had some sort of people try to rise against us. When you look, if you want to know kind of the behind the scenes, running this since November of last year, we get a lot of messages from people from around the world, and they tell us about the anti-Semitism that they're experiencing. What I want to tell your audience and Jews that don't see it is that they're living in a bubble. They're living in an illusion of safety. And a lot of Jews have done very well for themselves in the U.S. And so they live in nice neighborhoods, and they feel safe. And some people live in gated communities and things like that. That's all well and good. But as we've seen happen in LA recently, Pico Robertson and things like that, we've seen the Jew haters come into people's neighborhoods. So just because you don't think that, that it doesn't exist, doesn't mean that it doesn't. And we're the people kind of on the front line fielding a lot of these sort of incidents and hearing about them from behind the scenes. And, Dmitry and I are both from Soviet Jewry. And so we know what pogroms are like. We've heard it from our grandma, our grandpa, our parents. We know what anti-Semitism really is and what can happen. And the reason that I even initially started, the JDN was because I knew where this was all going. As soon as it started happening, I knew where it was all going. And we're kind of reaching a tipping point here in the US where Jews are getting attacked and there's not a lot of consequences for those attacks.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And for listeners interested, I did a whole podcast about Soviet anti-Zionism and how that's really morphed into anti-Semitism. So I think certainly from the Soviet piece there, you almost had a 50-year head start, politically and culturally, of seeing through this veneer of, no, I'm just anti-Zionist, nothing to do with Jews. I think that facade has sort of been ripped off in the last couple of months in, I think, very striking ways. One of the other things that you had mentioned, sorry, is if we take a couple of steps back, just thinking about overall safety, and this might be an interesting difference between liberals and conservatives in terms of the role of trusting government. So I want to, explicate that for listeners. What might you say to somebody saying, okay, great, things might be a little bit more dangerous, but that's where the police come in, and that's where the government comes in to protect me and the community as private citizens. Now, obviously, again, there is a right-left debate about, do you trust the government to get things done? Typically, liberals and progressives do trust the government. Obviously, once you dip into progressivism, they're against police. But, good old classical Democrats would probably say, listen, I don't need to worry. I'll just call 911 if something happens to me. How might you respond to somebody that even questions the need for a Jewish defense group when we can all call 911?
I'll explain it this way. In my personal opinion, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I've been doing criminal defense for the last 28, almost 29 years in Los Angeles and other states. I do both state and federal. I've seen a lot. Okay. And one thing I can tell you is that trusting the police is all well and good. But the problem with that is that the police usually come in to mop up after something had happened. Okay. They very rarely get there in time to stop something from happening. Okay. So if you're okay with that, not a problem. That's that's your belief, and if you're comfortable with that, that's perfectly fine. I'm of the opinion that if somebody comes to attack me, in all likelihood, the police are not going to get there in time, and I probably won't even have time to call 911 while I'm defending myself. So I have to rely on myself, on my skills, and on whatever tools I have available to me.
And that's a great point, Dimitri. And I'm going to use a real world example that happened
please.
to me recently, just last week. So I went to a restaurant to get some food, and there's a homeless gentleman that came in, and he started talking to the people behind us, and he started saying, well, hey, if you guys could buy me a burrito, whatever it is. Right. And this older gentleman, there's an older couple there. They were playing like backgammon or something. And so the gentleman agreed, and they went up to the counter, and him and this guy started ordering. Was trying to figure it out, and something happened with the guy behind the counter, and there was a altercation. And this guy started saying, "If you disrespect me, I'm going to grab my homemade hatchet out of my backpack, and I'm going to chop you up." And he started saying this, and he kept saying this. And if you disrespect me, and he seemed to have, some sort of mental problem, right? And this isn't a Jew hate thing. This is just a real world example. And I'm standing there and I'm watching this, and this guy seems to go into a manic episode. He's pacing around the restaurant. He's saying he's going to chop people up. I'm really conflicted of whether or not I should go to my car and grab my pepper spray, because I really think something's about to go down. I get my food, and I'm feeling like if I don't do something right now, in the sense of I need to call the police, I may regret it, because I may hear later on the news that, hey, somebody got murdered. And all I had to do at that point. I truly felt there was a threat. So I left the restaurant. I called the police and I said, hey, this is what's happening. This is what I've observed. And they said, okay, we're going to get somebody out there. Now, this restaurant is 2 miles from the police station. So it took about 10 minutes for the police to arrive and do anything about it. Now, in those 10 minutes, and anything could happen. That is a really long time. And we waited there because they asked, us to wait and to observe and make sure he didn't leave the restaurant. And that is a perfect example, of you just don't, when seconds matter, minutes, isn't going to cut it. If you're in your home and somebody breaks in, and you're going to assume, right? A lot of people have this scenario that if somebody breaks into your home, whether you're Jewish or whether you're just at home, people consider their homes as a safety bubble, as a, insulation to the outside world, and you feel safe and secure there. But the thing is, there's people outside of that bubble that want to get in for various reasons. And so, okay, so you're going to sleep and suddenly you hear your door break open, and there's 3 guys, in your house. What are you going to do? There's if you call the cops, you're already too late because they're already in the house. So there's not a lot of time left, to depend on the police. And it's interesting, because I actually used to be, I've always been a moderate. I've always been democratically leaning. That has changed this last year. So, you could definitely say that I understand both sides of the coin. And it's really just something that you have to think about as to, hey, you know how they say when you want something done right, do it yourself. This is kind of that thing where you can rely on the cops, but you have no idea how busy they are. Even when I called the cops for that incident, it probably took a minute just to get through. So, and I wasn't necessarily directly in danger, but if the situation was different and you were in your home, it's a whole different ball game at that point.
Yeah, no, it truly is one of those things that even, I mean, I'm just speaking honestly, personally, I can imagine most of the people who listen to this, I can imagine are more liberal, just, knowing the audience. It's one of those things that almost you just don't want to think about because it's almost easier to outsource it to wider systems. So thinking, even though on a realistic level, I sort of intuitively know what you guys are both saying, and I think I believe it in my heart. This is why one of the reasons why I wanted to set up this podcast to talk about a lot of practical tips. We're gonna get to practical after the philosophical here. On the other hand, it's scary to think about that. So it's a lot easier to think, there's police everywhere and, they can just come. And so, I mean, it really is, I think, an interesting difference between liberals and conservatives. It gets into questions of personal responsibility and versus trusting government and, all sorts of things that we can tease out if we were talking just politics. One more question on just philosophy and, even taking a little bit of a step back and maybe getting more into to politics and really just chances of safety margins, because at least the way that I've started to see these things, you guys can correct me if you disagree from your expertise. A lot of setting up, self-defense. Let's talk about home self-defense for now, just this narrow case. A lot of it is just playing the percentages, right? If you do thing X, you might be able to increase your safety by a little bit. If you don't do thing X, you decrease your safety. Obviously, nothing we can do is going to insulate us 100%. And, everything there. There's a lot of studies showing, and this is getting now into the policy, that the presence of a weapon, specifically, let's say a firearm in someone's house, there's a more of a chance of that being a danger, whether somebody accidentally taking it and going off, not locking it up correctly, somebody with a mental health issue. Now, my response to that has always been skepticism, because there's always a difference between, blanket statistics and an individual that believes himself to be responsible. But I'm curious if you have any other thoughts on this. And, if somebody were to present you guys and say, okay, everything you're saying is correct, Joseph. I even agree with you. On the other hand, just playing the percentages game, the chances of something going wrong if I purchase a firearm and keep it in my apartment is actually more of a chance of me getting hurt than the tiny percent chance that the three guys break into my house overnight. I'm curious if you have
I,
thoughts about
I
this. Yeah,
think honestly, I think that's a very silly way of looking at things. I'm a very practical person. I would
yeah,
think,
it is.
if something works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. When we were kids growing up, right? Most of us found ourselves in the kitchen, going for a knife, trying to cut up an apple or whatnot, right? And we all remember our parents or grandparents telling us, "Be careful, you're gonna cut your finger, you're gonna, this and that. Be careful with a knife." And then we kind of grew up and we learned to use the knife, right? And all of us, I would think, use knives on a daily basis in our kitchens. And for some unknown reason, we still have all of our fingers,
Most
and
of us.
so most of us. And so, I think it's the same thing with a firearm. It's just a tool. It doesn't jump up and bite you. It doesn't do anything you don't want it to do. You learn how it works. You learn how to use it. You learn how to safely use it, just like that knife in the kitchen. And that's it. It's very, very simple. Now, if you have somebody with, mental health issues at the house, it's a consideration, obviously. If you have little kids, it's a consideration. Okay. But there are ways around it. You can always lock up a weapon, which you're supposed to do anyway under California law. You purchase a safe, a little one for a pistol, a larger one for a rifle, whatever it is, you keep it locked up. It takes literally no time at all to open it, if with a combination or maybe a fingerprint, whatever it is, in case of emergency. And only you have the combination, not your little kids, not somebody in your household that has mental health issues. You do it safely. You do it the right way, and you minimize any chance of any issues coming out of that. It's like I said, it's just a tool. It might seem scary to a lot of people simply because they don't know how it works. They never seen it. They never held a gun, never shot it before. Um, you know, there was a course that we did, and it was a course that involved beginner pistol shooting training and shooting, and I believe the group consisted of uh, 4 or 5 men, and I think 6 or 7 women, and nobody in that group except me uh, ever held a gun in their hands. Period. I took my son-in-law and I went along, just for company. And he never shot before, and so we did that class. And the instructor was, by the way, fantastic. He explained how everything works, how to load the bullets, where it comes out, how to hold the gun, where to point, not to point, everything. And every single person, every single beginner, the age group was, I think, between I would say mid 30s to mid 60s. By the end of class, which was 3 hours long, everybody, each of these beginners was running around and shooting around obstacles like Rambo. It was crazy to see. Okay. And they felt very comfortable with the weapon, no issues whatsoever. So, I think it's just a matter of knowledge and practice.
Yeah. And I mean, if I may answer your question head on, you hear about all these statistics of people, getting hurt and things like that. So what you have to consider is that there are more guns than people in the US. There's so many more guns than people. So when you have a scenario like that, people are obviously going to get hurt because there's a lot of irresponsible people out there. I can tell you, I've been a firearms owner for a long time. I've never even come close to an incident because, once you start practice, number one thing you learn in firearms specifically, right, is safety. Um, and you drill that into your own head. You be overly cautious, particularly because you don't want to get hurt. You don't want to hurt anybody else. That's the number one thing is safety. And of course, guns are dangerous. So are cars. You didn't know how to drive at some point, but you learned, and if, thankfully, hopefully, you haven't hit anybody with your car, right? And it's really the same principle. And when it comes down to let's talk about something a little bit more benign than firearms. We live in earthquake country, right? Do you have extra water? Do you maybe have some propane tanks that you have as a, backup for cooking if the power goes out and you can't make your food? Well, those can be dangerous if stored improperly and things like that. So being prepared, means sometimes that you have to take some sort of a risk. Now, the thing is, we're not trying to come on here and fear monger and say, hey, you're going to get attacked. You're going to get assaulted. Hopefully you don't. But the thing is, do you want to become another headline in the newspaper, or do you want to protect yourself? I can tell you that all my firearms are responsibly locked up in safes, quick access, rapid access safes that only myself and people of age know the combo to. There's no way for kids to get in. They're reinforced safes. The gun isn't going to go off by itself. And I have one by my nightstand. I have one in my closet. We have one in another room, and things like that, right? So it is about being a responsible firearms owner, and it's about changing your perception of what it is to protect yourself, because things have changed for Jews in this country, whether people want to believe it or not. Things are different now, and it's our duty as Jews to change with it. It's, correct me if I'm wrong here, Rabbi, but it's a mitzvah to save somebody else's life. It's a mitzvah to preserve your own life. And if we start looking at it from that angle, it's a mitzvah for you to learn how to protect yourself and your family, because bad things are happening. And our main thing is, we're not trying to scare anybody. We just don't want bad. We are sick and tired of seeing Jews getting assaulted in the streets. There was a Jewish family pretty early on. A guy broke into their house, started screaming "Free Palestine." I think they had just moved here from Israel. I could be wrong on that incident, but so I mean, these things are happening, and to ignore them, is to think, hey, an earthquake's never going to happen either. But you just don't know. And the other side of this is, there's an entire Jewish community. So anytime a Jew is assaulted, anytime a Jew is attacked in this country, it weakens the image of Jews all across the country, and it makes people think that we're a target, that it's open season on Jews in this country. And anytime that a Jewish person is actually able to defend themselves, I think every Jew that sees this video, we cheer, right? We see that, hey, finally we got we got safe. We were able to protect ourselves. One of our own didn't get hurt, because there's so few of us, and there's a lot of hate brewing out on the streets, unleashed and untamed, and the cops, frankly, have been very poor to respond, whether that's incidentally or by design. We have not seen a good response from the police to protect Jewish people and Jewish communities.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with all that. But before, I was playing a little bit of devil's advocate, but I inherently agree with everything you're saying in terms of Jewish safety. I mean, I have a little bit of a different experience, because talking to a lot of Jews in the community, most people are not public facing Jews. They're not going out with a kippah or a big Israeli star. For me, I wear a kippah everywhere I go, and I certainly have noticed the uptick in hostility. I mean, I've had "Free Palestine" screamed at me out of car windows. I've had people glare at me. I've, really, had nothing physical, thank God, but I've really seen an increase in just environmental dislike towards me. And I'm, not super public, but I'm relatively public. I mean, most people on campus know who I am. I would say most people in Irvine, have some idea who I am. And so it is a little bit disconcerting, how easy it is to know exactly where I'm going to be from one day to another, and separate than me as an individual, where, say, Hillel, the organization that I'm a part of at UC Irvine, I mean, we consistently will have events with 100 students in the middle of campus with, again, there's campus security, but as we discussed, campus security might be even a step down than the regular police, because not only are they beholden to, all the bureaucracy of police, they're also beholden to bureaucracy of campus. We saw this a lot this past year. The second thing, you had mentioned Europe before, you had mentioned Paris. I was actually traveling in Europe a couple of weeks ago. I was in Geneva, Switzerland for really just one day. I was heading up to the Alps to go backpacking. But I went to there's one kosher restaurant sort of in the corner of Geneva. And I went in, and this is, a fascinating and terrifying experience because I go find this restaurant on Google Maps. There's no signs anywhere. There's a massive door that's closed. I mean, the restaurant was supposed to be open, and I sort of knock on the door. I see a small mezuzah, so I was able to figure out, this is probably it. If I didn't know to look for a tiny mezuzah in the, hiding in the top right corner, I would have walked right by it. I knock on the door. The door gets buzzed open. I walk into this room that's, not much bigger than you can imagine, your average bathroom, say, in somebody's apartment. There's a guy behind bulletproof glass,
Wow.
that says, who are you? Yeah, I'm, Daniel, I'm American. I'm just, trying to get some dinner here. I was wearing a hat, actually, not a kippah, because Europe in general. They said, why did you come here? And I said, oh, I keep kosher. I just wanted to get some dinner. And they said, okay, passport. They questioned me a couple more times. Then they finally, opened the door to the actual restaurant, and it was, a pretty massive restaurant. There was actually a synagogue attached to it. So the rabbi, because, every time you eat in a kosher restaurant in Europe, obviously the entire Jewish community is in the restaurant. So the rabbi, what happened to be there, who's also the mashgiach, and so he, asked me how I was doing, and he saw that I was sitting by myself, so he came and sat with me. And in sort of my, relatively broken but still passable Hebrew, and his passable Hebrew, we had a whole conversation. And I said, is this really necessary? I mean, you have a guy behind bulletproof glass as security, and he, the number of different things that he said had happened just that spring and summer. I mean, we're terrifying. Obviously,
Yeah.
America is not Switzerland, or it's not Paris, or it's not, Italy or any of those countries, but sadly it does seem to be trending there. The last thing you said, and then Dimitri, I know that you said you seemed like you had something you wanted to say. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of the image of the Jew, in terms of what you were saying. I mean, one of my favorite topics to teach about is Zionism, which, of course, one of the initial, fundaments of Zionism and the Zionist movement was changing the image of Jews to the world. It's no longer are the Jews going to be these sort of meek victims, where the image of a Jewish hero is a guy, with a crooked back bent over a Talmud. But a Jewish hero is actually going to be somebody that is stronger and muscular and athletic and knows how to run and shoot and, to dig and work the land, and also self-defense. And that's an idea that I think a lot of American Jews are coming to appreciate more and more. I mean, I think we always sort of appreciated it as, Zionists in the American Jewish community generally. And I'm sort of going into my own psychology here. So, I'm trying to play armchair psychologist on myself. A lot of it is, I think we were happy that other people were doing that, right? If I'm being honest with myself. So I always knew that I was very happy that there was an IDF, and there were 18 and 19-year-olds that were training and knew how to shoot and knew how to fight. And when I was 18 or 19, I was sort of a stereotypical image of somebody either studying in yeshiva or then in college studying over, random books. I think now that's changing, and there really is this idea in America that when people hear Jews, I want them to picture, Dimitri, sitting there, clearly very muscular and bulky, and not some, guy with a crooked back that's just going to be bullied without any recourse to defend themselves. Dimitri, I don't know if you had anything to say on that before we move to something practical.
After October of last year, after the tragedy happened, and anti-Semitism started to be on the rise, a lot of people were writing on Instagram, Facebook, etc. This is awful. How can people just attack Jews? Call them names. This is just terrible. And everybody was saying we don't understand why it's happening. And one Arab actually commented on that particular post, and I completely agree with his assessment. And he said, because nobody is afraid of the Jew. Jews have no deterrent effect, unfortunately, right? When you want to pick on somebody, let's say, right? Are you going to pick on somebody who is aggressive, who looks you straight in the eye, who looks athletic, let's say, right? Or are you going to pick on somebody who is, who looks timid, meek, not aggressive, unable to defend him or herself? If
Right.
you're this evil type of person, right? Criminals in general pick easy victims, right? And a lot of uh, Jewish grandmas would tell their grandkids, listen, don't make eye contact, just walk by, don't stir up trouble, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, oy vey, blah, blah, Um, the problem with that approach is that it actually attracts violence because you're an easy target. Okay,
Predators are attracted to prey.
absolutely. You don't want to act like a gazelle. You want to act like another predator. Okay. Now, that's in theory, right? What does it mean in practice? In practice, you're not going to go out and look for trouble. Of course not. But you have to look like you're sure of yourself, like you belong on, wherever you're at, on the street, in the building, wherever you're at, you belong there. You make eye contact. You don't stare people down, but you show them that in case they want to do something, they're gonna have to work for it, you know? And my dad, when I was growing up, my dad, he was a cardiologist. He had a PhD, and when he was younger, he was in the Soviet Army, Special Forces. He was a Spetsnaz paratrooper. Um, and he used to tell me that a human being needs to be developed both mentally or intellectually and physically. And if one or the other is missing, you're not really a balanced human being. And the way I look at it, a lot of people in our community are intellectually brilliant, just brilliant people. But physically, they're lacking, you know? I mean, when was the last time we got into an altercation with somebody? When was the last time somebody was in your face trying to, smack you down or whatnot? It doesn't happen often, it doesn't happen. But when it does, what do you do? When was the last time anybody in your audience uh, made a fist? Does anybody even know how to properly make a fist? When was the last time you were punched in the face? Can you take a punch? If it came down to it, you know, I'm not advocating being Rambo here, just practical, just practical knowledge. Krav Maga, for example, right? This is the self-defense system in Israel. It's actually very popular. It's a fantastic system to teach a novice, get him up to speed quickly on how to defend him or herself. It's a really, really good system. You can advance from there. You can, specialize, go into boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, whatever it is, right? Krav Maga has probably the best weapon defense that I've seen. Gun defense, knife defense, stick defense, all that stuff. Well, again, since we're on the topic, right? What if somebody swings a stick at you or a baseball bat? You have any idea what to do except run? Most people have no idea. And if it happens and you know what to do, then you just smile at the guy trying to swing a bat at you because he's going to be in a whole world of trouble.
I want to point something out that what you're saying too, Dimitri, is that running isn't always going to be an option.
Yeah.
You always assume that you have an out, that you can talk your way out of a situation, that something I want your audience to understand is when American Jews and any decent person probably thinks that everybody is like them. We want to impose our morality, right, on somebody else. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that you think that everybody grew up like you. Everybody has the same goals. Everybody has the same moral compass. They don't want to hurt you, and et cetera, et cetera. And that is a really hard concept to grasp, is that not everybody is like you. And I mean, I often struggle with that myself. And, you can use a very basic example, right? You do a deal with somebody and you pay them some money and they're supposed to give you a service, and they rip you off. And you think to yourself, I can't believe this guy just ripped me off. I did everything right. I was honest. and they ripped you off. And you're shocked because that person isn't like you. They're a different person, and them ripping you off, that isn't even the worst thing they've done that week, right? So we need to stop assuming that everybody is like us, that they don't want to hurt us, and that there's people out there that want to hurt Jews. There's people out there that want to do worse to Jews, and they have been, luckily not that successful, and in a lot of cases, but in some cases they have been. So we have to stop sort of assigning, that our morality and our moral compass to everybody else, thinking that everybody else is a good person, because that's just not the reality. One thing, you mentioned being in Europe, and here's another kind of behind the scenes thing. I get a lot of Jews from the UK that message us and they say, we love what you're doing. And, it's really amazing. But we are so jealous of your guys' right to defend yourself in the US. We're so jealous of your right to have guns, pepper spray, knives, batons in some states, whatever it is. They are so jealous because in the UK, the only thing that you are allowed to have is a spray that leaves a mark on somebody that's like a UV dye, and a wrist alarm. And if you guys aren't familiar with what the wrist alarm is, it's basically like a speaker. And when the wrist strap gets disconnected, it blares a loud siren. That is literally the only thing you are legally allowed to carry in the UK. And the Jews in the UK are terrified. They do not know what to do. Sharia law is taking over in some parts of, London and things like that. I talk to these people regularly. So this isn't conjecture or something that I'm making up. These are people that are scared, that are asking me, what can we do? And the only things I can come up with them, right, is A, do Krav Maga. And that's kind of far and few in between. And B, get an umbrella that you can use as a weapon, right? I had to really think outside of the box of what you can legally carry in the UK, because you're not even allowed to carry a big flashlight there, which is something that we've also sort of pitched for here in the US. So when we talk about rights and things like that, just understand that we are so lucky to live in this country with the rights that we have. It's almost like you having healthcare, like really good healthcare, and then you getting hurt and you're like, well, I'm just not going to use that because, I'll be fine. Well, it's the same thing with your rights to own a firearm or carry pepper spray or whatever it is. You have to use those rights because you are so lucky that you have it, and you just don't even know.
Yeah, no, what's happening in Europe is terrifying. I actually have been meaning to do an episode just about general anti-Semitism in Europe. I was also actually in Spain earlier this year over spring break with my wife, and just the sheer ubiquity of, really virulent anti-Israel stuff just everywhere, from spray painted to photos to, there were certainly neighborhoods that, let alone not wearing a kippah. I took it off the second I landed in the airport, but even just walking around as somebody that wasn't noticeably Jewish, I certainly felt terrified to be in certain areas. And I would actually give British Jews a third option, which is they should probably seriously think about leaving. You had mentioned the chief rabbi. I think it was the chief rabbi of France. I saw the headline also that announced, especially after the election, just for listeners that aren't following, it seemed like the far right was going to win, which was problematic, but actually most Jews in France actually voted for Le Pen and the far right because they're afraid of immigration, where instead, Macron, who's a centrist, basically made a deal with the devil with the far left, and now it seems like they're going to come to power with, again, just some virulent, awful anti-Semitism. But that's happening in France and Britain and, all over Europe. You started to move us to practical. I tend to get bogged down in the theoretical, so I'm glad that Dimitri, you at least started pushing this. So let's talk about really we can talk about both three different realms that I'm thinking about in my head. There's home, there's public as an individual, and then there's public as, let's say, Jewish organization. I don't know where you want to start, if there's a more natural place to start, but we could start general and then we can narrow down. So why don't one of you guys pick one, and what should people know about? Let's start with the apartment. We can start with concentric circles. What should somebody know about home defense? Let's say somebody knows literally nothing, except for it's probably a good idea to lock your front door. Do you think everybody should go out and immediately buy a gun? Do you think, is it pepper spray? Is it a knife? You had mentioned a lot of other weapons, blank canvas, what do we need to know?
Sure. Well, you got to think of, first of all, self-defense as a layered approach. So first of all, there's no one size fits all. We do not try to push heavy on guns, though we do believe that guns are your best option for home defense, because there is simply no way, particularly if you live in a small apartment, right? Like if there's 5 guys that kick your door down, and this is a thing that just happens, it has nothing to even do with being Jewish. This is just crimes that happen. And again, we're all under the illusion that it's the one robber that breaks into your house. But what you're not seeing, and that I watch a lot of police body cam videos and things like that, just because I'm interested to see what's going on out there. And you see crews of guys breaking into people's homes. Now, I don't care who you are. I don't care what Krav Maga you know. I don't care if you have a baseball bat. There is simply no way that you can fight off 3 guys or 4 guys or 5 guys that came there to clean your house out. So first of all, I think awareness is layer number 1, right? Having cameras. Can you get a Ring doorbell? Can you get some cheap IP cams? Like they have Wise cams on Amazon. They're $25 a pop. They're $3 a month for your subscription. Knowing what's on the other side of the door is a big, big thing for you to know, who's there, what do they have? Because if you see somebody's aggressively knocking, maybe it's your neighbor. They're trying to, get away from whatever it is, or maybe there's a guy with a gun outside. And that is something that I have actually seen, guys kicking down people's doors. And I think it was in Texas, and they had a gun, and the guy was able to see that on the camera, and he just started shooting through the door. I mean, these situations are not, they're not happening all the time, but they are happening. So awareness is one thing, maybe having some additional barricades on your front door, but just understanding what your points of entry are, right? Do you have a back patio door? There's a big phenomenon where they lift the patio with the suction cup, and there's a lot of space at the top of the door, and the door just goes right off the lock, and they can just go right into your house. So, I mean, there's garage door robberies, which Dimitri and we sort of discussed this on our podcast, where they'll fish something through your garage door, and they'll pull the emergency handle, and your garage door disconnects from the mechanism, and boom, your garage door is open. So they don't even have to break in. But you know what? If you had a camera and you had a motion detection set up, you would know that there's somebody outside doing something. Security lighting, if you live in a single family home, you can get those solar powered security lights. Those are great, practical, passive security things. One of Dimitri's things is get a dog. If you get a big dog, that's a great alarm system, and an actual alarm system.
I mean, you can get a little Chihuahua. I mean, that'll deter some people. I mean, they're pretty loud. If you want actual,
they're aggressive,
right? If you want actual physical protection, not just an alarm, not just an alarm that's alive.
My wife and I just got a puppy, and so my entire arm is full of scratches from a little puppy bite. So I don't know if she's deterring anyone, but
just try not to treat it entirely like a Jewish dog, because then they're not protection at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are some passive things that you can do, right? What are you going to do if somebody actually gets into your house? I mean, honestly, you got to think to yourself, if it's one person, maybe you'll be able to take them. And maybe, look, the last thing that Dimitri and I ever want to do in this world, and we've talked about this, is shoot somebody or hurt somebody. We don't want to hurt anybody. That is literally the last thing I ever want to do. But if it's between somebody wanting to kill me and me, it's going to be the other guy. I don't want to shoot anybody, but I will if they come into my house. If they're coming for your family, is there anything that you wouldn't do to protect your family? Well, so I honestly don't think that there's a better option than a gun. But if you wanted something that's not exactly lethal, they do make I think Berna they make non-lethal guns that shoot pepper ball pellets. They also shoot kinetic rounds, which can hurt somebody. They're more of a deterrent than anything. And pepper spray is always good, but again, pepper spray is really not for defense, and we can get into that on the street portion. Pepper spray is for you to get away from the situation. So, I mean, Dimitri, I mean, I don't know if you want to add anything to this, but
I do actually. I do.
Okay.
You know, we're talking about guns, right? I think each one of us has to understand that the only time you actually pull out a gun is to kill somebody. You don't pull out a gun to scare somebody because that's called brandishing. That's illegal. You don't pull out a gun just because somebody, let's say, stole your kippah off your head. Okay, you're not going to shoot him. That's excessive force, way excessive, right? The only time you pull out a gun is if your life or the life of your loved ones is on the line. When somebody comes to do you harm, to kill you, or to cause you great bodily injury. Okay, these are legal terms. That's when you're allowed to take out a gun. Okay, and you're only allowed to use the gun when there's just no other option. Okay, if you're in your home, then there's something called the castle doctrine, and et cetera, and we can get into the legal issues later on. But literally, everybody needs to understand the only time you go for a gun is when you have no other choice. Period. Okay. There are other weapons available to you for lesser type of situations, right? Like I said, somebody takes your kippah, right? Um, and you know, you're not going to use a gun. You're not going to use a knife. You're probably not going to even use a pepper spray. It's just not called for. If somebody's attacking you physically, you can use pepper spray to basically, stop or slow down their attack. But you certainly won't use a gun if they're attacking you empty-handed, unless, it's three, four, five people, then potentially that equation changes. And it's very, it depends if there is a case, let's say a criminal case, it really depends on who the prosecutor is and how the jury looks at things, et cetera. So these are very cloudy questions. Okay, nothing is black and white. But again, if you're being attacked by a crowd and they have sticks and knives and whatnot, yeah, I have a feeling, you're probably going to be justified in using a gun. Um, so, like Joe said, we would never want to, hurt anybody or let alone kill somebody, God forbid. But if it comes down to it, it comes down to it. It's very simple. I will never hurt a living thing in my life. I will never hurt a fly. I love animals and I love every single human being, even if they're delusional in hating me. I will not hurt them. But if they come for me or my family to kill me or my family, I wouldn't even blink. And I would lose zero sleep because they made that choice. It's on them. You know, um, a lot of times I hear that, I'm not religious, even though I went to a yeshiva for ninth grade and went to a conservative Jewish school for high school. I'm not religious, but I hear the Ten Commandments being translated into English all the time, and they say, that you shall not kill. I think that's not a proper translation, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I think
Yeah,
the
yeah.
proper
No, you're
translation
totally right.
is you shall not murder, and that's a completely entirely different concept.
Yes, I was very inclined actually to go down a whole Jewish traditional approach to self-defense, but I had to squash that instinct for the practical. But now that you brought it up, I will just say, and I think Joseph alluded to this before. I mean, self-defense is all throughout Jewish tradition. I mean, the Tanakh, talks about it throughout the Talmud. I mean, there's a famous case in the Talmud. I remember studying this years ago in yeshiva where somebody breaks into your house and, what are you allowed to do? And the Talmud actually rules that you're allowed to kill them basically in any scenario if somebody breaks into your house. And, there's an entire Jewish tradition about self-defense. For anybody who says that Judaism is a pacifist tradition, they just don't know anything about Judaism. I mean, certainly Judaism is not pro going out and killing people for no reason, of course,
Of course.
but this idea of pacifism at all costs has just never really been a Jewish idea. I actually agree with you, Dimitri. I would also lose zero sleep over, the just self-defense for anybody. Before we get sort of bogged down in tangents, sticking with the home for a second. So just Joseph, I'm hearing you say, you have your first layer of defense, preventative. obviously locking your doors, making sure that they aren't a situation that they can easily be unscrewed or suctioned up, cameras, lights. In terms of second layer, for people that hear you and say, you're probably right, I probably should get a gun, but aren't going to get a gun. Would you recommend pepper spray? Would you recommend a knife? You had mentioned baseball bats, what everyday items would you recommend? I mean, just personally, I'll say in the last couple of months, I bought a couple of different pepper sprays that are around in different places. I've also been carrying it around publicly with me. We'll talk about public in a minute. I also, during one day that I was particularly nervous, I think I was reading about something happening, and I think it was New York at the time. So I bought a relatively hefty knife that I've also been keeping by my bed. Now, granted, that is not obviously going to be any real show of force against somebody that has a firearm or against multiple people. So is there anything else that you can recommend before somebody really takes the plunge for whatever reason? And I'm speaking again from how I introduced this in the beginning, from somebody's perspective of, guns just make me feel uncomfortable. I am that stereotypical person. Buying basically anything that's not a gun feels a lot less of a step than actually making the punch to get a gun. I don't know why. I mean, guns are obviously much more powerful than knives and pepper spray, but the psychological step, and I can imagine this is true for a lot of people, of going from not owning a gun, but owning, a dog and knives and batons, to owning a gun, that is a big step. So I'm curious if there's anything else.
Let me ask you a quick question before we answer yours. I'd like to ask you a question.
Yeah.
You bought a knife. It's a big knife, scary looking knife, right? I'm sure.
Yes.
Do you know how to use it?
That's what that was going to be my question.
Yeah. No. So
do you have any instruction on how to use a knife aside from just, swinging it or trying to stab somebody or whatnot?
Aside from a couple of, not a couple of many YouTube videos, nothing practical. I've never.
So let me tell you something. This concept is in every single martial art, every single discipline, fighting, self-defense, etc. You will fight the way you train. So if you don't train with your knife, you will very likely not even use it.
And I want to add something to that, right? So you got a knife, and that is fantastic that you're thinking about these things proactively. But let me ask you this question: what do you think would be crazier to use on somebody if the time came? Do you think that shooting somebody from a distance sounds less of a for lack of a better term, memorable experience than stabbing somebody in the throat or
no,
right?
So I clearly know we're getting at. Listen, it's funny personally. I'll say two things. One, I'm very much not squeamish in the sense of, and this is just my own personal, just knowing myself. I don't think this is true about most people. If I had to do something, I would do it without thinking twice. Granted, if I don't know how to use a knife and they could just take it from me, right, that would obviously be bad. I think I bought it mostly, and from what Dimitri said before, I don't know if the brandishing applies to knives also, mostly in a case where I think it would deter somebody. So I could imagine, more for, out on the street, if somebody is, rips off my yarmulke and starts pushing me and starts, calling me, baby killer, I could imagine then taking out a knife would hopefully cause them to disarm it, as opposed to what you were saying before, sort of just keeping my head down and continuing to walk. Obviously, that can backfire, which is why, again, I think this is all just a percentage game to some extent. But I want to throw that back to you.
So I carry a knife wherever I go. I mean, I hope I never have to use it, but I'm, it gives me a little bit of confidence to know that it's there. For a variety of different reasons, also pretty useful. So something I kind of do want to, I want to backtrack just a little bit. And, you talked about Jewish defense through the ages, right? We made a meme, or not a meme, but it's a picture, right? And it says, Jewish defense shouldn't be controversial. We've been doing it for thousands of years. And that is a fact, right? You have the Maccabees, you have the Hashomer, you have the Haganah. I mean, we can go further back than that, right? excuse me, the concept of Jews defending themselves really isn't a new thing. It's a new thing for American Jews because we've been living in this utopian society of America and protection, and we assimilated, we melted into the landscape of America. You know, a lot of Jews were American first and Jews second, and they still very well may be that. But that's just, you know, that's my take on it. But I think it's also sort of a fact that everybody sees themselves in American, and they want to play by the rules, and they, you know, good people, and and the Judaism part of it has sort of taken a backseat for a lot of people. So when you think about that, you know, you got to think about what your roots really are. And Jews have been fighting our entire lives. People have been trying to kill us our entire lives throughout history. You know, we have holidays, right? There's multiple holidays dedicated to people trying to exterminate the Jews. And we're facing another moment like that now. So, you know, anybody that's listening, I want them to understand that this is not a new thing. You're just not used to it because you have never seen this type of anti-Semitism in your entire life. You've heard about it from your grandma, you've heard about it from your parents, you know, you've heard about it through history, but have you ever faced this yourself? You have not. And that's why a lot of people are kind of deer in the headlights right now. They don't know what's going on. And a lot of people want to stick their head in the sand and not pay attention to the fact that things are happening around them. So I just wanted to touch on that because I think it's an important part. I want everybody to think about that. You come from a long line of warriors. You're not, you know, you're not who you think you are, based on Jews living in America. You come from a long lineage of strong Jews. And that is something that you should remember when you think about that. I don't want to defend myself, or I don't want to do this or that. Coming back to our subject, right? So, you know, we talk about guns, and guns are obviously they're a deadly thing. You know, if I were to choose something other than a gun, I would say you can get an actual taser, right? The kind that the police use, and they shoot a electrical leads out, and they can take somebody down. The problem is they're very expensive. They cost about the same amount of money as a gun, and you get about one shot. I watch a lot of these police videos, like I mentioned. People get tased and nothing happens to them. They will rip the leads out. They will continue on, especially if somebody's on drugs. It has zero effect on them. So look, you can make a compromise, and you can get a gun that's a 22 caliber, right? A 22 has much less likelihood of killing somebody. It's still a deadly weapon, but it is a very small caliber. And if you shoot somebody, you'll probably likely very much hurt them, but it won't kill them, right? Like a 9mm or something like that. So a 22 caliber is, you know, some people like to refer to it as an enhanced BB gun. I mean, it is a gun though, so it's not to be taken lightly. And that may be a good compromise, honestly, because there really is no substitute. There's a reason they call guns the great equalizer. That's, you know, because one person versus 5 people. There's no way, 2 people even, right? 2 guys that are stronger than you that break into your house and go right for your bedroom because that's where they're going to go. That is a scary situation, and you have seconds to react. Are you going to get your knife out of your sheath? Are you going to get your pepper spray and fumble with that? You have to be ready at a moment's notice because it's going to happen really, really quickly.
Joe, I respectfully disagree.
Okay, go ahead.
A 22 caliber has absolutely zero stopping power. You can probably unload the entire magazine, and the person will keep on coming. If you're afraid of killing somebody, you might as well not even use that, in my opinion. The only time you use a gun is if you're going to kill somebody, and the 22 does a very poor job of that. Okay.
Well, you know, there is hollow points that you could get for 22s, and I've watched ballistic tests of this. And I mean, look, the point is, if it's between getting nothing and getting a 22, I'd rather you have the 22. That would certainly, if you're purely going for scaring somebody away or whatever.
I mean, look, let me just backtrack a little bit. you get a gun, the purpose is not to necessarily kill somebody, but the purpose is to stop them,
Stop
right?
them. Yep.
And a lot of times it results in the person being killed. Uh, a 22 does a very poor job of stopping somebody, even the hollow points. And I mean, that's one of the reasons the police, use 9 millimeter and a 40
Nines.
millimeter,
Yep.
and the FBI transitioned to 10 millimeter, which is an insanely strong round. 22 was reserved for spies when they tried to execute somebody point blank into the temple. I don't think we are accurate enough to do that. We don't train that way. We're civilians. This is not what we do. Okay, so you need something with stopping power. And in fact, what I would advocate is when you're in your house, you would probably be better off with a shotgun
Sure.
because shotgun,
I'll go with that.
you aim in the general direction, and if you load it with buckshot, you will probably not kill the other person, but you will certainly stop them.
Yeah, and I mean the shotgun is a pretty close range weapon in that regard, but I mean we can agree to disagree. I guess my point is a 22 is usually a good segue into other pistols. If you get a 22, you would feel very comfortable with that. You'll probably very quickly transition to something else. But I mean I see your point. But I think it's more of to get people comfortable with
Yeah,
just
this is
owning a
also
gun.
I'm totally talking, at least when I said the difference between a gun and not a gun, it's totally psychological. I'm not talking at all about the efficacy aspect of it. I
Sure.
just knowing myself and just I'm talking about hundreds of people that I've talked to about this over the last couple of weeks that inspired me to reach out to you guys. People, pepper spray, they'll buy it within 20 seconds. They'll pull out their Amazon on their phone and, okay, I just ordered 3 cans of pepper spray. A gun, that's already getting into people's core philosophic and political beliefs and really everything I started with. Let's take the flip side for a second. Let's say somebody listens to this and they're convinced. What is the process like? I'm not talking about the legal process, but what is sort of the minimum amount of training you would recommend for somebody who buys a gun? Obviously, you had mentioned before, you fight as well as you train. Obviously, just buying a gun and keeping it and maybe having used it once, probably not the way to go. So if somebody is convinced and they are going to get, a 9 millimeter or something like that, what do you think they would need to have done, or what sort of the bare minimum to which you would say, okay, that's actually worthwhile having?
I would say, first of all, get yourself a firearms instructor, somebody who can teach you how to properly use the weapon. Um, and you should train from time to time. You don't have to go out every weekend, obviously. Once you get comfortable shooting it, you can probably get away with, going out, maybe once every half a year, and you'll be fine. Obviously, you'd want to practice more, but that probably would be at the bare minimum. You should shoot indoor and as well as outdoor because it's a completely different experience.
Really is.
Yeah,
And
very,
I
very.
learned that recently myself. So
They have courses. They have courses where you don't just stand behind a counter and shoot at a paper target. That's all well and good, but you take courses which teach you how to move and shoot as you're walking forward, as you're running, as you're falling backwards, as you turn and shoot, things like that, which is really the way to go. That's practical. If somebody's in your house or threatening you in some way, you're not going to tell them, hold on 1 second. You have to stand, 10 feet away from me and don't move until I, properly aim at you. Things are going to be very dynamic, and you should practice like that.
absolutely. And it, when I talk about the 22, right? When we were talking about that part of it, a lot of kids learn with the 22. That's usually the gun of choice that you get for, a kid. And to a lot of people, that sounds extreme, right? That you're getting a gun for a minor. But I can tell you from personal experience that I learned to shoot. My dad taught me how to shoot from the age of 11 or 12. We'd go out in the woods and I would shoot, and I still have that gun that I learned to shoot on. So the thing about it is a big part of what we do, with the JDN is it's education. It's not just, hey, you need to defend yourself. It's, okay, how are you going to do that in a smart way? And a lot of that is definitely training. I can tell you that I never ever took class. I just was comfortable enough to go out to the shooting range by myself and shoot at the targets, and then I would do that every 4 to 6 months, and that was it. But, Dimitri and I recently did a class together, and I learned a lot, right? And there's a lot of things that people who are experts, right, that have been former police officers, have been former military, can teach you. Not only, first of all, safety. That is the biggest thing. It's not about shooting, it is about being safe. First and foremost, if you can do that, if you can feel confident and feel safe with a gun, the rest of it you can learn, but you have to keep practicing these good safety standards. That's, whether that's like putting a gun in a holster is a totally different thing than if you go to a shooting range and you put it on the counter and you load it and unload it there. It's a different thing. So you have to learn how to do that properly. You have to learn how to do that safely. So mother is the repetition of all learning, right? And so you do these things over and over and over again, and you make sure the gun is unloaded. You make sure the gun is unloaded. That's probably the number one rule. Don't forget that you got to make sure the gun's unloaded, right? From there, you can learn the techniques. As long as you can hit a target, you're going to be in good shape. But the safety thing is going to be, you'll learn that in one class. But it's how you reinforce those safety standards, with yourself, and really, it should be a family thing. It shouldn't be that you're the husband and, you go and you learn how to shoot the gun and da. What if something happens to you and your wife needs to learn how to use the gun? Or vice versa, right? What about just teaching basic safety to your kids to make sure that they don't touch the gun and understand the gravity of what it can do? These are all kind of considerations that you have to make for training.
So a couple of things. You know, I have 4 kids. I taught them how to shoot early on. To them, shooting or pistols or rifles, they're not a mystery. It's not something that they want to explore on their own, and go and get dad's gun and see how it works, and God forbid something happens, right? I taught them how to use it. They shot. They felt comfortable. It wasn't a mystery that they needed to unravel. It's not interesting anymore. So they don't go looking for it. They don't go looking or grabbing the gun or whatnot, okay, or trying to. So that's number one. Number two, we were talking about protection inside your home. So there are various things that experts advocate. That, for example, if somebody breaks into your house, there's something called a funnel way of defending your house, right? You funnel them into a narrow place where they can be easily shot.
Like the movie 300.
Exactly. The Persian army couldn't get through, right? Because it was very narrow. And so same thing. Okay, that's one concept. Another concept is from, they discuss getting an attacker into an area where you can cross shoot them. So not shooting at each other across the hallway, but having, let's say, 2 shooters, yourself and your wife, let's say, in different places, and the attacker doesn't know where the bullets are coming from, for example, things like that. There are very various ways to do this, and Joe and I leave that to the experts. We're not experts, in that. But there are concepts to be learned, concepts to be practiced and trained, and again, going back to training, most California legal pistols are sold with safeties.
Yep.
Okay. When the safety is on, you can pull the trigger, nothing happens. Okay. You have to flip the safety off, and then you can shoot. The issue that a lot of people have is that in stressful situations where they actually need to fire off a round, they grab the gun and they start pulling the trigger, and nothing happens because they forgot to release the safety. And the reason they forgot to release the safety is because they don't practice enough. And in a stressful situation, you forget. You think to yourself, no problem. I know this gun has a safety. I mean, I bought this gun. I know how it works. I've shot it before. I know it has a safety. Something happens, I'm going to flip off the safety and I'm going to shoot. Okay, if it comes down to it. And they don't.
One thing too that I'd like to add to this, right, is have a plan. Don't just think that you know what's going to happen. You need to have a plan of what's going to happen when somebody breaks into your house, and you need to practice it with your family. Imagining it and talking about it, it's all well and good, but you need to have unloaded firearms, obviously, or dummy firearms, whatever it is, or whatever plan you have one. Don't just be caught with your pants down that a thunderous crash happens at your front door and you don't know what to do. You need to have a plan. You need to discuss it with your family. You need to practice it several times a year. One thing that we sort of dove into guns, but I did want to talk about some alternate, things that you can do. And we've talked about the home stuff, but I want to talk about pepper spray because I think that is a very practical solution for the street for most Jews.
Yeah,
I
so
have
let's
pepper.
talk about this. So we've been talking about the home for the last,
Mhm.
15 minutes. Let's move to the street now.
Sure,
Let's say, it's one thing to have a firearm at home. I actually have a lot of friends who have a gun, but they never carry it with them. I mean,
sure.
obviously, I'm by no means an expert in California open and concealed carry law. Apparently, it's a lot more difficult to get that than just keeping it locked up in a safe by your bed. But let's say somebody is on board with Team Gun at home, but if I go to Trader Joe's this afternoon, I probably will not be taking it with me. What are then the what should somebody know? We can eventually go into pepper spray, but just in general, what are things that people should be paying attention to that might be different concerns?
Sure. Well, so I mean, I think you said it right there. Pay attention. That's thing number one is have awareness of your surroundings. If you're in a parking lot, look around, see who's around you, what they're doing. A lot of robberies and things like that happen in parking lots. It's a high crime statistic area. So you're going about doing your shopping, you're, going from store to store, whatever it is, you're going through your routine, everybody has it, you're on autopilot, you're getting, the hummus, whatever it is, right? And so you get caught off guard. So that's number one. You need to be aware of your surroundings. Everybody's buried deep in their phone and they're not paying attention to what's happening around them. And look, I'm guilty of that stuff too, but I think I'm more aware of my surroundings than other people. And that's just because I want to be safe. What's practical? First of all, and this extends to, I looked this up before our show here. If you are 16 years old, you can carry pepper spray with your parents' permission. In California. I looked this up, and Dimitri, correct me if I'm wrong, but I looked this up in several different places, so I'm hoping that's accurate. But if you have a written note of consent on you, and you have the pepper spray, you can walk around. I highly suggest that every parent that has kids of age do that. It is so cheap. It is effective. You can get it super quick. But of course, you have to know how to use it. And there's videos for that because a lot of people automatically assume that you press the pepper spray with this finger. It's actually with your thumb. So if you didn't know that, then there's a way to spray people depending on the pepper spray. So there's a lot of different nuances depending on what you get. So I advocate for pepper spray in every car. I have 3 cars. I have pepper spray in every single one of them in the door pocket. I am ready if something happens. I also advocate for having a large metal flashlight. I have that in the back seat of my car. My girlfriend has stun guns in her car on top of the pepper spray. So, and I've certainly been in a situation where I could have used the pepper spray. It almost went very bad, but I was very happy to know that it was there. Something to keep in mind too is the pepper spray expires. So you want to keep and the expiration date, set a reminder in your phone. Hey, the pepper spray is expired. Change out the canister, right? So that is a very practical thing that every Jewish person should do. If you're not doing that, there's no good reason in the world why every Jew shouldn't have pepper spray on them. And when we talk about pepper spray, Dimitri and I really like pepper gel over pepper spray because pepper spray kind of shoots as an aerosol, get in your eye, but the wind can also blow it back in your face. The pepper gel is more of a stream. And it sticks, to an attacker's eyes. Something that you have to keep in mind is that when you do hit somebody in the eye, it doesn't work immediately. It may take a second or two. So you need to back up or whatever it is. The idea of pepper spray isn't you're putting the attacker down. You spray them and you get away from the situation and you call the cops. That is, pepper spray is there to buy you time and to get you out of that bad situation. Sometimes you can't get out of that, you're in your car or whatever it is. So you need to figure out what your next, course of action there is. But so that would be my number one thing on the street. And it's practical, it's cheap, kids can have it. What would be another thing that you would recommend, Dimitri?
Well, pepper spray. I think it's a great idea. It's not really lethal or anything. If it gets in somebody's eye, they can wash it out. So there's no permanent damage. You can always carry a knife with you. There are knife laws that everybody needs to be aware of, regarding the size of the blade, how you can carry it concealed, not concealed. Can you carry a folder versus a
Button action.
non-folding knife, etc. Obviously, automatic knives in California are prohibited unless they're extremely small. I think
2 inches.
blade.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Right. Which can't really do much damage. But there are knife laws that everybody needs to be aware of. But knives are, they're definitely a great weapon to have, just in case. Again, you don't pull out a knife to threaten somebody or to say, leave me alone. That's again called brandishing, and you can get in trouble for that. You really hope you never have to pull it out, but if you do pull it out, it's always in actual physical defense, physical
And you got to
self-defense.
practice with it. And that, something that we preach is that, again, if you don't practice taking it, let's say you put a knife in your purse or something like that. If you don't pay attention, first of all, and there's somebody coming at you, you're already in a bad situation. So you got to make sure the knife is accessible. You got to make sure you know how to open it. You got to make sure you're holding it the right direction, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of just wanted to add that layer onto the whole
Yeah,
knife.
and like for example, I'll give you an example. If somebody pulls out a knife on you, right, and they actually want to hurt you, and you cannot run away. There's just nowhere to go. Your back is against the wall,
You're in a store.
or in the store, or you're with your elderly parents, let's say. You're not going to leave them alone. You're not going to run away and leave them alone, right? You have no choice but to pull out your own knife. Do you actually have any idea how to fight somebody who has a knife, who wants to actually kill you? So these are the things that we try to kind of bring to people's attention, that potentially it's something you need to be aware of. And again, the way you will fight the way you train. So if you don't train or train very little, you're going to be extremely ineffective. In your own mind, you might be a hero, but in practice, it's going to be very, very dangerous.
Yeah, and I
You
mean,
know.
look, the reality is a lot of people have this ideal situation that they're alone, right? That you're not with your kids or whatever it is, and this person comes out and they're going to be able to handle themselves. The thing is, it's never going to go the way you think it's going to go. It will never go because people are unpredictable. There's so many different variables. So you think in your head, that, hey, this guy's going to come at me. I'm going to do this and that. That's just not how it's going to go because you have this idea of how it's going to go, and this other person is going to do this whole other thing that you never expected, right? And so you have to be ready for these surprise situations if they happen. And again, Dimitri just, he gave a very good example, right? You're with your elderly parents, you're out, somebody comes up, they see you're wearing a kippah, what do you do, right? If you have no clue, if you've never even practiced, you bought a knife, but you never practiced taking it out, you're in trouble, right? And you have nowhere to go. And this person, you can't talk your way out of this situation. There's some situations where Jew haters will not back down. And you can try calling the cops, but I gave you a great example of why that might not be the best option.
Got it. So we've been talking for a while now. I've been very absorbed by the conversation. Lost a little bit track of the clock. Winding down, one just a general question in terms of practicality. What have we not discussed? Is there any other, whether this be public events, private, out in public, at home? Is there anything else? Any other, either genres or just specifics that are important?
I would say that try not to go to places where you may have issues. Don't walk down a dark alley. Find a different way to your car. If it's at a parking lot somewhere, go around where there's light and people. Things like that. Obviously. And the other thing is, different weapons are suitable for different people.
Yep.
Like we were talking about, let's say Krav Maga or boxing or jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, things like that, right? It might be great for me, but might not be great for my 80-year-old uncle. He's not gonna go do any flying sidekicks. You know what I mean? So for somebody like that, there's a different consideration. What's applicable to that person? What's applicable to somebody who is 5'2" and 120 pounds versus somebody who is 6'4" and 260. Very different considerations, right? And that's very individual and very personal. And everybody needs to assess themselves and be really honest with themselves. Look at yourself in the mirror and really be honest with yourself, not with anybody else. This is not bravado. This is nothing. You understand what level you're at and then try to improve it.
It's
Very simple.
survival.
Yeah, try to improve your level. Try, physical training, get physically stronger, learn how to fight if you can. If you're not there, okay, consider different weapons. Pepper spray, knife, maybe a pistol, maybe a shotgun, whatever. I would advocate, if you can, get a CCW, concealed carry permit. Okay, it takes a little bit to do, but it's doable. Okay, and that way you have a pistol on you at all times. For, again, self-defense, defense of your family, etc. So these are the issues that you need to understand, and obviously, try to safeguard your home, in the ways that we discussed.
Yeah, and I think something that I want to add to this is that there's safety in numbers, right? So if you can have two of you versus going somewhere by yourself, do that. Go with your friends, meet with friends. Unify, right? The Jewish community is strongest when we're together. When we're apart, that's when the problems start to happen. And unfortunately, we're in the diaspora, right? And everybody's kind of sort of doing their own thing. And we do have some strong Jewish communities, but there's people that live in the middle of nowhere, and there's not that many, Jews in Colorado, for instance, whatever it is. Find other Jews, go do things with them. If you're concerned, but unification is really our strength. That's how we win. That's how we've won every single time against people trying to eradicate us. And I think if we come together as the strong Jewish communities that we are, we will continue to make each other safe. I think every synagogue needs to have armed Jews there you're going to shul and you need to have a gun on you. The guy at the front door isn't going to cut it. I walked into a JCC the other day and there's no armed guard. They just asked me who I was there to meet, and they opened the door for me. And look, I mean, it's a scary situation.
I actually went to Chabad, and they had security there, literally armed to the teeth, bulletproof vests. They had knives and they had guns and this and that. They asked me who I was and what I was there, to do. They asked me to open up my jacket, which I did, and they said, "Okay, go ahead." I could have had a gun in my back pocket. I could have had a knife. I could have had a gun on my ankle. I mean, I could have literally brought in a bazooka. So these guys looked scary, but in effect, they were utter amateurs.
And
The
guess what?
security-
They're there for a paycheck. They're not there. They
So-
don't care about Jews because they're a private security company. Unless they're a Jewish security company, they don't care.
Well, I mean,
They care. They care to a degree, but not
I
the
think
same way a congregate would, right?
I think that whatever a Jewish school or synagogue hires security, They should really vet these people to make sure that these guys are professionals.
Yeah.
You know, it's very easy to put on a bulletproof vest and look mean. You know, it's another thing to actually safeguard a whole community with children, school, whatnot. You know, and these guys did a horrible job,
Yeah.
just ridiculous.
And if we want to talk about, unification and things like that, there's some events that we have coming up that sort of help bring Jewish people together for learning self-defense. Something that we're working with another Jewish group is a self-defense seminar for women exclusively. So that'll be happening in the LA area. We're still trying to pin down a date. So,
And where can people find out, just before you get into the specifics?
Sure.
If you wanted to find more, can you just say your website and what?
Yeah.
How
Absolutely. So our probably the best vehicle to get information and updates is our Instagram. So it's just Jewish Defense Network, all one word. Same thing. We have a TikTok with the same name as well. We have a YouTube channel, Jewish Defense Network. That's where we have our Alpha Jew podcast, where we talk about, different defense kind of things. And we have a variety of different guests. But for instance, tomorrow we have a podcast coming out. We met with the Deputy District Attorney of Los Angeles, and we talked about former, but he was at one point, right? So, but we talked a lot of different defense scenarios with him. We talked about Pico Robertson, we talked about the UCLA encampments. We talked a lot of different hypotheticals and situational, things. So that, it might be a good episode for people to check out. We talk about the law of self-defense. And our website is jewishdefensenetwork.org, not .com. And we have a list of resources for Krav Maga firearms training. And we're also getting into doing our own events. As I mentioned, a women's only self-defense seminar that'll be posted on the Instagram as soon as we nail down a date. We actually found an instructor that's doing this. It's going to be free, and it's going to be, open to everybody. That's any Jewish woman. And then we're going to have some shooting events that we're also lining up, not only here in California, but also in, potentially some other states that we're working. All this takes a lot of time to set up. So we're trying to do it in a way that's quality, inclusive, and overall safe.
And this is an absolute nonprofit venture. Joe and I are making absolutely nothing on this. We're actually spending our own money, and we're doing it because we simply cannot not do it at this point. After October 7th, after the anti-Semitic incidents that we've witnessed, online and everything being the way it is, we cannot just sit still and take it.
We care so much about Jews being safe, and we honestly, I wish I wasn't doing this, right? I wish I was. I used to love racing cars, right? I wish I was back into racing cars and things like that. I wish this was not something I felt that I had to do. But it is what it is, right? And I feel like it's my duty, and Dimitri feels the same way. We feel like we cannot not do it because there is nobody else that's doing it.
We look at the Jewish community, honestly, as our extended family. These are our brothers and our sisters and our kids. These are our kids that we have to protect through training, through knowledge, through something. We need to protect our community.
Everybody, and that's everybody in the community, old, young, as we stated before, whoever it is. There's so few of us already, and we want to keep the people that are alive and around for a lot longer, and not scared. We want to see proud Jews on the streets wearing Jewish attire, kippahs, and not be afraid to be who they are.
Well, Dimitri and Joseph, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.